The International Monetary Fund says Nigeria needs to ramp up domestic resource mobilization amid ongoing reforms. The first Deputy Managing Director of the IMF, Gita Gopinath, spoke to Arise business correspondent Rotus Oddiri in Lagos about a range of issues from tariffs to welfare transfers and inspiring more girls to study economics. Here is the report.
Gita Gopinath, First Deputy Managing Director over at the International Monetary Fund. Thank you so much for speaking to Arise News. Welcome to Nigeria. I have to start with what's going on around the globe. Back in January, IMF released its Global Outlook update from October of 2024, and you did upgrade global growth hinged on the US, with more demand coming from the US as opposed to other countries. But in a very accurate forecast, you did highlight risks and uncertainties due to tariffs. And here we are. So the US equity market has lost all its gains since the election. We've got reciprocal tariffs coming from Canada and China to the US. What is your take on what's going on and how that could affect growth this year?
There have been significant developments, especially over the last 24 hours, in terms of tariffs that have been imposed by the US. And we're also seeing some retaliation from the countries on which it's been imposed. At this moment, I can't give you an estimate of what the impact of all of that is going to be because we're going to work that through. In April, we put out our World Economic Outlook again, and that's when we'll have the latest numbers. The point that we've been making all along is that it's just in the best interest of all countries to resolve trade disputes amicably, and because trade has been an engine of growth and it can be very helpful to countries. So resolving disputes in other ways would be very helpful.
Indeed. Here you are in Nigeria. There's been a lot going on here. Reforms, we've had some domestic shocks, but it looks like things seem to be stabilizing. What's been your takeaway speaking with the government, private sector folks with what's going on in Nigeria?
Firstly, there is a strong recognition that this government has undertaken bold reforms that were much needed in terms of FX deregulation, fuel subsidy reforms. Those were important and had to get done. And these are difficult decisions to make. So recognition of that has brought stability to macro indicators like the strength of the Naira. Now, that said, this is also an important time for the government to accelerate social transfers to Nigerians. And the reason I say that is because the big spike in inflation, the food insecurity that has come along with it, the rise in poverty that has been quite significant, it's very important to address that. And the government can do that by providing social transfers. It can use the savings that it's gotten from the fuel subsidies to make those kinds of transfers, and also then move on a pro-growth agenda, which, again, I saw a lot of recognition for the need for that.
So you mentioned the Naira. It actually appreciated pretty well against the US dollar. The gap between the official rate and the parallel market rate, things like 1,499 versus 1,510. So it's really narrowed. Is that top of line currency stability for a government? Or there's a whole lot of other things that you got to look at?
There are many things for the government to look at. Currency, I wouldn't say use the word stability, but confidence in the currency is very important. Now, currency tends to be stable when it is backed by sound fundamentals, which is if monetary policy is doing the right thing in trying to bring inflation down, if fiscal policy is also doing the right thing in terms of containing the size of the deficit. I think one of the big priorities for the government in Nigeria is to do more domestic resource mobilization. Government revenues as a share of GDP are about 10%. It's very low compared to its peers. So doing more on that front would also give confidence to markets. All of that is critical. Moving on the path of growth in terms of improving security, power, ease of doing business, all of this is going to be super helpful.
I wanted to ask, how important is it to communicate patience when it comes to reforms? I just think, for example, is Iran. Their finance minister was just removed out of office after 6 months, and the president said you can't expect economic reforms to take place in just 6 months. So just generally, how important is it to be able to communicate to the public that reforms take time?
It's very important to communicate to the public, not just that reforms take time, but also to communicate what exactly is it that you're doing, how is it going to help them, and not help just some pockets of the society, but help everybody. Because you have to bring society along, otherwise there will not be the patience to do all the difficult reforms. So communicating, bringing them also into the conversation in terms of the actual decision making and thinking through strategies, that's going to be critical. And we've seen that. We work with 191 countries, and the countries who are successful in doing reform are the ones that bring society along.
My final question for you. Now, it just so happens that it's International Women's Day later this week, but even if it wasn't, from yourself to Kristalina Georgieva, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, Christine Lagarde, Ursula von der Leyen, lots of prominent women in economics and business, how do we inspire our young girls to, follow in your footsteps?
Yeah. Well, firstly, thank you for that. I think girls are not very different from boys in the fact that ultimately you're going to have girls going into economics if they see good prospects for jobs and careers from it. And I think the message I want to give to girls is that economics is the kind of subject where you can see yourself in many different professions. You could be in consulting, you could be in finance, you could be working for the government, you could be doing a lot of good for society, right? And so there's a lot of opportunity, and we need more women in this profession. Not just because there's diversity of views and that's wonderful, but sometimes women are just better at the job. So I think it's important. It's important to have women doing this, and it's important to make sure that universities provide the right kind of an environment so women feel like they're benefiting from the classes, that they can speak up, that there's a good peer network. All of this is helpful, but ultimately, women are also going to be guided by the cost-benefit analysis of working in the economics profession. And I just want to say that this is actually a very good benefit.
All right. Gita Gopinath, First Deputy Managing Director at the International Monetary Fund, thank you so much for speaking to Arise News.
Well, Dr. Gopinath there, talking about economics, which is our main subject, what she studied, and also, in her position as Deputy MD of IMF, Chief Economist of IMF, and interesting comments about growth within the Nigerian economy, which I think is something that should be of interest to us, and also about trade wars, which is a very potent subject. Now that Donald Trump, President Trump of the United States yesterday, increased tariffs against China by an additional 10%, and also, reinstated the hitherto suspended, tariffs against Mexico and Canada and all of that. Well, but I understand we don't have much time. But there's trade war, on the horizon. Financial Times this morning was talking about how that has affected S&P 500 and also the stocks, in Europe. So the world, the uncertainty has been deepened by the choices that the United States under Trump has made.